Barbara Nichols emerged on Broadway in the post-World War II era, migrating from the dance floors of New York clubs to Hollywood. Between 1954 and 1968, she joined the casts of B-movies and TV series, symbolizing the transition from stereotypical blondes to more daring roles in a landscape of American cultural change. Joan Collins, born on May 23, 1933, in Paddington, London, emerged in the post-war period when British cinema was seeking international prominence. She moved to Hollywood in the 1950s, joining the generation that succeeded the classic studio system and defined the television era. There, she built a diverse career, from epics to series. In the mid-1950s, it was common to see patients obtaining cigarettes under the supervision of healthcare professionals. At that time, medicine had not yet popularized the evidence about the harmful effects of tobacco, and smoking was tolerated in wards and waiting rooms. Medical advertisements of the era associated cigarettes with calmness and pain relief. During the polio epidemics of the 1930s-1950s, children's hospitals adopted the iron lung, a cylinder that supported the breathing of patients with thoracic paralysis. To alleviate isolation, nurses brought little ducks to the bedside, an early form of occupational therapy that lifted the children's spirits. London winter, early 1950s. The capital, still bearing the mark of post-war reconstruction, awakens. Fine snow covers the asphalt. Red buses appear on schedule. Workers head to the docks, secretaries enter the subway, grocers erect shutters, signaling the return to daily life, while Big Ben tolls 8 o'clock. In 1907, Australian swimmer Annette Kellerman appeared in Boston wearing a form-fitting swimsuit, claiming freedom of dress for women in sport. Arrested for indecent exposure, her act sparked an international debate that, in the following decades, drove reforms in women's swimwear. In Tascosa, a gathering point for cowhands on the cattle trails through Texas in the final decades of the 19th century, a group of cowboys gathers at the saloon bar after tending the pasture. They discuss cattle transport, while the town, now a ghost town, still creaks with wooden life. There, disputes over land and gunslinger reputations were settled. On October 24, 1901, when tourism and daring spectacles were becoming popular in progressive America, widow and teacher Annie Edson Taylor, then 63 years old, sealed herself in an oak and iron barrel and plunged 51 meters over Niagara Falls, becoming the first person to survive the descent. Built between 1901 and 1912 over the East River, the Manhattan Bridge was part of the urban expansion program that accompanied New York's consolidation as an industrial and port center. Designed by engineer Leon Moisseiff, the project mobilized steel, immigrant labor, and cable techniques that were then new. In 1963, when American television was becoming the primary stage for children's advertising, actor Willard Scott introduced the first Ronald McDonald to the public. The clown helped link the then-growing McDonald's franchise network to popular culture and marked a turning point in fast food marketing. The photograph from November 23, 1888, shows the Eiffel Tower in the midst of its construction, just months before its completion for the 1889 Universal Exposition. Begun in January 1887 under engineer Gustave Eiffel, the project symbolizes the industrial vigor of the Third Republic and France's quest for technological leadership. In June 1944, in the heat of the Battle of Saipan, a critical point in the American campaign in the Pacific, a simple gesture was observed. Amidst bombardments and amphibious advances, a Marine shared his only banana with a goat wandering among the ruins, a vivid contrast to the ferocity of the conflict, a scene captured by war correspondents. In 1952, in the post-World War II era, Long Beach sought to attract tourism and business. A local construction machinery entrepreneur, experienced in state competitions, joined merchants to launch Miss Universe, created after a split with Miss America and projecting the U.S. onto the international stage of the Cold War. In 1959, in Venice, California, the Miss Beatnik pageant was held, a showcase for a post-war counterculture. Inheriting ideas from the Beat generation of Kerouac and Ginsberg, young people criticized mass consumption and exalted creative freedom. On the local beaches, between cafes and jazz clubs, they recited improvised verses. Record of the British Antarctic Expedition, 1910-1913. Geologist Thomas Griffith Taylor and meteorologist Charles Wright inspect the entrance to an ice cave in an iceberg. In the background, the ship Terra Nova can be seen, which supported Robert Falcon Scott's mission dedicated to mapping polar terrain and climate. In the 1920s, municipal beach officers used rulers to enforce moral codes requiring women's swimsuits to fall below the thigh. The scene depicts officials measuring a bather's swimsuit, a common practice at U.S. seaside resorts after World War I, when mass leisure was beginning to popularize. On March 4, 1861, in front of the Capitol, whose dome was still unfinished, Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th president. 7 southern states had already seceded, and federal troops guarded the ceremony. In his speech, he defended the Union, but with Fort Sumter on the verge of explosion, civil war was imminent. In the photograph, dated to the difficult post-war years, a boy smiles as he tries on the first pair of shoes that will protect him on dusty streets. The image, typical of the charitable campaigns of that period, bears witness to how, even in times of scarcity, childhood finds openings for joy. In 1932, in the old Senate chamber of the Capitol, before the move to the court building in 1935, the German photographer Erich Salomon circumvented the ban on cameras in the U.S. Supreme Court. He pretended to have a broken arm, hid a Leica in his cast, and captured the bench in session, creating one of the 2 known images of the court in action. The photo shows Ham, a chimpanzee sent by the U.S. on the Mercury Redstone 2 mission on January 31, 1961. Selected in 1959 at Holloman Air Force Base, he learned to operate levers in a simulator, a crucial step to prove that human tasks would remain possible in microgravity before Alan Shepard's manned flight. A 1900 record captures Nikola Tesla, the Serbian engineer living in the U.S., instructing a young woman in swimming techniques in the East River in New York. At the turn of the century, progressive physicians advocated public bathing and aquatic exercise as part of the urban hygiene movement that accompanied the electrification expansion led by Tesla. At the Astrodome in Houston on November 14, 1966, Muhammad Ali, a name still new after abandoning Cassius Clay, appears moments after knocking down Cleveland Williams in the 3rd round. The title defense before a record audience and marked by swift footwork took place amid the debate over the Vietnam War and his refusal to enlist. In 1941, the Empire State Building completed a decade in the Manhattan skyline. Erected in 1931 at the height of the Great Depression, the 381-meter skyscraper crowned the height race that marked New York architecture between the wars, serving as a beacon of U.S. industrial progress and, during World War II, a civil observation point. In Hollywood studios, as television took center stage in the post-war era, Elizabeth Montgomery established herself as a constant presence in NBC's live dramas. Though remembered for her golden locks, in 1958 she dyed her hair darker, trying to escape the stereotype of the ingenue blonde. In 1950, under the decline of the Rana regime, Nepal still had no roads connecting the Kathmandu Valley to the Indian plains. The first automobile, imported in parts, advanced not on wheels, but on the shoulders of newer porters, demonstrating the human mediation required by the mountainous terrain and isolationist policy. In 1976, during Soviet campaigns in the Arctic, the Russian worker Nikolai Machulyak was filmed offering condensed milk to a polar bear and her cubs. The scene reveals practices of human approach to wildlife, promoted by Soviet science seeking to demonstrate mastery and coexistence in the far north. Sergeant Stubby, mascot of the U.S. 102nd Infantry Regiment and the most decorated dog of the Great War, appears in this circa 1920 photo wearing the uniform and medals he earned on 17 missions on the Western Front between 1917-18, when he warned troops of gas attacks and captured a German spy, becoming a symbol of the role of animals in the conflict. In 1929, on the eve of the Great Depression, brides wore straight-line dresses of silk or satin with long sleeves, ankle-length hems, and veils fastened to the forehead, following the Art Deco silhouette of the late 1920s. Fabrics were sometimes repurposed from family garments, a sign of the austerity to come. A 1960 record reveals Marilyn Monroe, symbol of post-war U.S. cinema, alongside playwright Arthur Miller, who 4 years earlier had testified against McCarthyism. The couple, married in 1956, was living the final act of their marriage, which would end in 1961 under the watchful eyes of the media and the Cold War. In December 1955, after the Montgomery bus boycott brought an end to racial segregation on buses, Rosa Parks was photographed in a front seat, a section then reserved for whites by Jim Crow law. The scene marked the political turning point that propelled the civil rights movement. In 1968, at the height of swinging London, German photographer Frank Habicht captured the young Renee on Westminster Bridge in Live It Up. In a backdrop of protests against the Vietnam War and echoes of May '68, the image reflects the rise of youth culture and British social transformation, driven by psychedelic rock and transgressive fashion. In 1885, in the yard on Bedloe's Island, onlookers and workers stand beside the colossal copper face of the future Statue of Liberty, newly arrived by French ship. The scene records the Republican gift from Paris to the United States being unpacked to, the following year, rise as a symbol to immigrants. In 1908, at age 68, Claude Monet paused his series of French landscapes to capture Venetian light. In this image, in Piazza San Marco, a symbol of the Serenissimo's mercantile power, he appears with a pigeon on his head, alongside his wife Alice Hoskede during his brief stint studying the lagoon. Photographed by Kusakabe Kimbei around 1870, this image documents a Japanese shoemaker's shop in the early years of the Meiji period, a phase in which the country abolished the shogunate and opened itself to Western influences. The local commerce reflects the transition from traditional crafts to emerging urban demands. In 1963, when he was still known as Cassius Clay and preparing to challenge Sonny Liston, Muhammad Ali reenacted in a Louisville gym the victory of a young fan. The gesture, captured in the midst of the civil rights movement's emergence, illustrates his charisma and commitment to the community. We have reached the end of the video. Subscribe and leave your like.